Hello and welcome again to Thursday's edition of Alaska Weather. Up first, hazardous weather graphic showing advisories, wind chill advisories, the central interior, the Koyukuk Valley there, Battles location on down into Tanana. In the central interior, especially the higher elevations where the higher wind gusts have been experienced there. And then over toward the upper Tanana Valley, 40-mile country, Eagle down the Northway and all the other locations there, wind chill advisory, and also for the eastern Alaska Range and the Copper River Basin. That's for wind chills ranging from anywhere from 35 to 55 degrees below zero for the next tonight, tomorrow, and maybe even tomorrow night, and possibly into Christmas Eve. Otherwise, the Susitna Valley has a blizzard warning out that kicks into effect at 8 p.m. this evening. As winds begin to increase, look for blowing snow to begin to reduce visibilities, with winds expected to kick up to 65 miles per hour later tonight and into Friday. So visibilities and the blowing snow could be reduced to a quarter mile or less at times, or in some cases even whiteout conditions. And then down the southeast coast, there are winter weather advisories, winter storm warnings, and winter storm watches. All that's for heavy snow that's expected to roll in tonight and continue through tomorrow and into tomorrow night, anywhere from 8 to 16 inches worth in some areas, except along the central coast there in the advisory zone, less amounts there. Port Alexander to Sitka, Mount Edgecumbe, and those locations. And satellite imagery showing a band of cloudiness that's shifting northwestward from the southern Bering Sea there in across the southeast coast, with the heaviest band down there over the southern panhandle, and a couple of low centers with that. You can see one passing over the eastern Aleutians. That brought some very strong winds into the Alaska Peninsula overnight last night as that passed by there, and another one in the southern Gulf of Alaska, another low center there. And the cloudiness really having trouble getting north into past Cook Inlet, really kind of cutting off around the Anchorage area. That's this mid and high level clouds, and clear to the north just from about Anchorage northward, and then the clouds to the south, and really not much in the way of any precipitation occurring, except Kodiak Island seeing rain all day today, and some precipitation over Bristol Bay as well as the Aleutians. Most of the moisture, though, north of the Aleutians, kind of in more of a showery pattern there, Adak and Atka. And again, up over the northern interior, temperature is very cold. Yukon Flats, eastern interior, milder with the wind out toward the Bering Strait, staying above zero or above zero in some areas, most areas actually there. And a few flurries on the Arctic coast with weak systems dropping southward around a big upper level high that's over the Arctic north of the Russian coast there. And one of those brought some continuous light snow showers there to the Kaktovik Barter Island area. Otherwise, remainder of the Arctic coast, North Slope dry, interior as well. And tightening gradient, beginning to increase the winds, kind of decoupled from the surface there due to the very cold Arctic air, but the higher elevation seeing an increase in the winds, especially over the Copper River Basin areas and into Lincoln Island Glacier Bay. And again, variable clouds over Cook Inlet with a little bit of moisture. Southern Kenai Peninsula, a little bit heavier there for Kodiak Island, and rain and snow. Gusty winds. In fact, Cold Bay is at low center track northwestward. Cold Bay around midnight last night had a peak wind gust of 84 miles per hour. Otherwise, throughout the day today, winds of 55 to 60 miles per hour in gusts occurred over the Pribilof Islands, and 40 to 60 mile an hour winds occurring also over the Bristol Bay area, Kodiak Island, up in toward Kamishak Bay, And then those start to lighten up as you get up over the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, more in the 25 gusts, 45 mile per hour range there. Gusts to about 40 miles an hour to the northeast St. Lawrence Island, but dry conditions up in that area. Clouds on the increase there over the Panhandle, and the snow moves in tonight. Again, winter storm warnings out for much of the southeast coastal areas for heavy snow beginning tonight, continuing into tomorrow. And some of that snow will spread up to Yakutat, and then the tightening gradient there and the increasing winds, especially in the Matanuska Valley and channeled areas of the Copper River Basin, Copper River Delta. Start to see some blowing snow with those winds. Otherwise, dry conditions. No additional new snow expected in those locations. Rain and snow Kodiak Island with the rain down towards sea level, and of course the snow at the higher elevations. That same pattern into the Pribilofs and the Alaska Peninsula. Rain or showers, light winds for the Aleutians, all the way out to Chimionat too, and not too bad wind-wise for the Alaska Peninsula as the gradient continues to tighten there over the interior. Winds will increase across much of the central and southern interior of Alaska tonight. Now continue into tomorrow, could see some areas of blowing snow right on out to the southwest coast. And again, Matanuska Valley and anywhere in the interior there with snow and blowing snow, southeastern Copper River Basin into the northern Panhandle as snow heavy at times continues. And then starting to, we'll begin to warm up there over the southern southeast coast late tomorrow and tomorrow night. Then another disturbance brings a little bit more widespread area of light snow, possibly to the eastern Arctic coast during the day tomorrow. Another system dropping down out of the Arctic there. Not a lot of moisture with it coming down from that location, but enough to produce some areas of light snow, reduced visibilities, probably some IFR flying conditions up in that area there. Winds stay very light out over the southern Bering Sea and the central western Aleutians. See not much gradient out there at all with numerous showers or areas of light rain with the milder temperatures there. But colder air is starting to pour back southwestward into Bristol Bay and Kodiak Island, so snowfall levels will be coming back down towards sea level there. And then moving into Saturday, chance of snow Kodiak Island, snow likely for the southern Bering Sea, another push of cold air into the Pribilofs and pushing down toward the eastern and central Aleutians will begin to change the rain to snow for Unalaska Island. And rain and snow showers for Adak and Atka with snow, periods of snow for the Pribilofs with increasing northeast winds, probably gusting 35 to 45 miles an hour, and gusty winds out of the east and northeast over the southeast interior, and chance of snow across south central Alaska, especially the Kenai Peninsula, especially the western Prince William Sound area and the southern Kenai Peninsula areas see the heaviest snow, maybe some increased snow on the eastern slopes of the western Alaska range. Otherwise, temperatures warming up to near 40 in the afternoon for the southern southeast coast, so that'll change the precipitation over to rain there. And also along the central coast, mixed rain and snow possibly up toward Yakutat, but staying cold enough for snow, some of which will be blowing snow for the northern Panhandle up the Klondike Highway towards Skagway. Otherwise, the central northern interior stays very cold. Temperatures well below zero, maybe a little warmer with that moisture over the eastern interior. They're up to about Eagle, but still staying below zero even in those locations all the way up to the Arctic coast. And for the lows tonight, single numbers in the northern Panhandle down into the lower to mid-20s elsewhere. 33 to 40 below for the Copper River Basin and 10 to 20 below for the Kuskokwim Valley. In the teens for Bristol Bay, but mid-30s Kodiak Island, and staying above zero south central Alaska to mid-20s there toward Homer. Highs tomorrow not much warmer than the lows, a few degrees warmer, but back down to around 5 to 15 above, and 5 below to 10 above for the Kuskokwim Valley, 10 to 20 below for the Copper River Basin areas. Valdez high about 18, and a high around 10 for Haines. Otherwise, mid-30s now in the central and southern coastal areas of the Panhandle, followed by lows right around freezing there as warmer air continues to infiltrate into the Prince of Wales Island area, and also from Port Alexander to Sitka there, and even over toward Metlakatla, but staying cold up around Juneau with lows Saturday morning around 15. 25 to 35 below again for the Copper River Basin. Back to well below zero temperatures of the Kuskokwim Valley, even Bristol Bay falling down to 0 to 5 below. Lower 20s Kodiak Island, and down towards 0 for south central Alaska. Lower teens for Homer Seldovia, 16 for Seward. And then the highs below 0 Kuskokwim Valley, Copper River Basin, 5 to 15 south central Alaska, near 20 for Homer. 20 to 25 northern Panhandle to near 40 in the south. And up in the interior tonight, 40 to 55 below for the lows, and in the teens, single numbers in teens out toward the Seward Peninsula. Highs tomorrow, well below 0 in the east, and teens to lower 20s, say 22 at Homer, upper 20s St. Lawrence Island, followed by lows 35 to 45 below, some areas a little colder than that, and near 0 to 10 above out towards the Seward Peninsula. Highs below 0 over much of interior Alaska, but teens out to the west, and then for the southwest coast, lows 5 to 10 tonight there, Togiak Bay up to Nunivak Island, mid-30s for the Pribilofs, mid to upper 30s for the Aleutians and Alaska Peninsula. Highs tomorrow near or into the lower 40s for the Alaska Peninsula and all of the Aleutians, mid-30s for the Pribilofs, and in the teens for the southwest coast, followed by lows 5 below to 5 above for the southwest coastal areas on Saturday morning, mid-20s for the Pribilofs, lower 30s for the Aleutians, followed by highs Saturday afternoon, 5 to 10 for the southwest coast, 30s to near 40 for the Aleutians.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
First line weather graphic for Friday morning, showing VFR from the Arctic coast out to the northern Bering Sea, all the way down to St. Matthew and Nunivak Island and into Bristol Bay, as well as Cook Inlet and the North Gulf Coast. Got some marginal VFR creeping up across the Barren Islands there with IFR Kodiak Fognak Island. Another area of IFR over the southeast Bering covering the Pribilofs, and then some VFR for Adak and Atka. The rest of the Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula looking pretty marginal. IFR advancing northward, marginal for Lincoln Glacier Bay, and then IFR, the remainder of the southeast coast, and probably by late morning, that will become IFR all the way up to the border there, Skagway, White Pass, Chilkoot Pass, and VFR, interior Alaska. We've got some increasing marginal VFR with that moisture coming in, working in from the southeast to the northwest there, into the eastern Alaska range, possibly the Wrangell, St. Elias mountain areas. Otherwise, interior Alaska staying really good. VFR out over the northern Bering Sea. Now VFR down to, marginal VFR to the Pribilofs. IFR kind of dissipating out over the central Bering Sea. And some lower conditions edging southward toward the eastern Arctic coast. And for Saturday morning, that area kind of swings off to the west-southwest there with a pretty good area of IFR now, central, western, north slope, western Arctic coast, marginal VFR, central, eastern Arctic coast, but that moisture getting cut off at the Brooks Range south of the mountains. VFR, all of interior Alaska, northern Bering Sea. Marginal for the Pribilofs, areas of marginal VFR with some areas of VFR for the Aleutians. IFR, north coast of the Alaska Peninsula, and northern Kodiak, Fognak Islands. IFR, as well as IFR now into Prince William Sound, North Gulf Coast, and into the northern Panhandle, southern Panhandle also IFR, and then some IFR up across central eastern Copper River Basin to the extreme eastern Alaska Range. Saturday afternoon, still pretty good VFR, most of interior Alaska. Lower conditions now over the southeast interior, Copper River Basin, marginal VFR, some IFR, and some lower conditions showing up on the eastern slopes of the western Alaska Range, possibly a narrow band of IFR there that'll extend down across Kamishak Bay, Barren Islands to Fognak and northern Kodiak Island, Panhandle IFR, Alaska Peninsula IFR. And for Anatuvik and Adigan, another VFR day for both of those passes tomorrow, as well as Lake Clark, Merrill, and Rainy. Good VFR flying, either approach, windy VFR. Isabel, VFR, trending toward marginal VFR in the afternoon. And Mentasta, a little more extensive, starting out VFR, and possibly by midday or so, and through the afternoon, look for diminishing conditions there to marginal VFR. Tanita stays VFR. Portage, VFR, either approach, and Chilkoot and White, becoming IFR, means it could be VFR to marginal to start, but it will be IFR probably by the late afternoon or late morning through the afternoon. Freezing levels tomorrow morning at the surface, almost right up along the North Gulf Coast and in Shelikof Strait there, north of the Pribilofs now, but it's near St. Matthew Island. And for icing, areas with that moisture streaming northeastward there into the Panhandle could get some areas of isolated moderate rime icing as far west as Cape St. Elias down across Kodiak, Alaska Peninsula, and to the Pribilofs and eastern Aleutians. The best chance will be of any considerable moderate rime icing will be over the southeast coast. Otherwise, jet stream, big upper level high there over the Arctic Ocean, centered north of the Russian coast. So that puts northeast flow 110 knots there over the northeast interior. And then upper trough over the Susitna Valley. And we've got westerly flow at 60 knots across the Kenai Peninsula, and warmer 90 knot wind flow from the southwest over the southern Panhandle. 9,000 feet showing strong winds over the interior, 90 knots there, it looks like over the northern Kuskokwim Valley, 65 knot easterlies over the Bering Sea there, and southwest 40 to 45 knots into the Panhandle, 3,000 feet, strong winds here as well, up to 75 knots in the lower Yukon River Valley, Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta into the northern Bering Sea, 55 knots over the western Alaska Range. And turbulence, considerable moderate turbulence, mechanical turbulence, especially over the mountainous terrain of southern Alaska and the Panhandle.
Season's greetings, star spotters. Trace here. This time of year, a lot of Americans are talking about Christmas, and stars play a big part in the Christmas story. So let's go look at the sky. If you hit the darkness just as the sun is setting this week, you might be lucky enough to see Venus and Mercury following the sun below the horizon, plus Saturn and Jupiter following them, but none of those are stars. Wait around until after 9 p.m., and though you probably won't see the Star of Bethlehem, you will see the brightest star in our sky, Sirius the Dog Star. To find it, look southeast. Sirius is down and left from the three belt stars of Orion's hourglass figure. If it existed, historians think the Star of Bethlehem was most likely a triple conjunction of planets, though comets and supernovae have also been suggested. Whatever really happened, keep an eye out for Santa this week and keep looking up.
Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder, and we have a special guest in the studio today. We welcome Amanda Terborg of the Aviation Weather Center. Thanks for joining us, Amanda.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Amanda's flown in all the way from Kansas City, and for those of you that don't know, the Aviation Weather Center serves the lower 48 for aviators, just as the Alaska Aviation Weather Unit here in Anchorage serves all of Alaska. So I kind of wonder, what's the Aviation Weather Center in Kansas City doing to help out Alaska, Amanda?
Yeah, you know, we do a lot of collaboration work with our sister station up here. Lately, we've been doing a lot of work, especially in the satellite meteorology.
Okay.
In particular, we have been looking at ways to better identify icing conditions in clouds, which is a big deal up here because, as I'm coming to find out, even though I'm not from here, you guys have a lot of pilots here.
We have a lot of pilots. In fact, when you say you can't get there from here, that's how you get there.
Yeah.
Very good. Okay, so with icing potential then, what's Kansas City working on?
Well, we are working on something that will help us, again, identify the icing in the clouds. You don't want ice on your aircraft. No. Not only does it add a whole bunch of extra weight to your airframe when it attaches to the wings and the nose cone, but it can also mess with your aerodynamics.
Right.
And in the most serious conditions, that can mess with it enough that you can actually crash.
It changes the shape of the wing, and that makes it sometimes impossible to fly, right?
It does, yeah. So we want to figure out a way to better forecast for that.
Makes sense.
Now this particular image is over Alaska. The colors here are a little goofy. It doesn't look like your run-of-the-mill satellite image.
Okay.
But the red is where you have liquid clouds and the blue is ice. But again, it really doesn't tell you a lot where you have icing conditions in that cloud. Because in those clouds, there's little droplets, and they're cold, and they're actually below freezing, but they're still liquid, and that makes them sticky.
Okay.
So when an aircraft flies through there, those droplets are sticking to the aircraft, and it can happen amazingly fast.
Right.
And so that's what we're trying to find. And there is a product called the Aircraft Flight Icing Threat that does this. And it's basically looking at the temperature of the cloud, and it's also looking at the size of the droplets to identify a probability and intensity of those icing conditions.
Okay.
And if you flip to the next image, this is a case from Juneau, Alaska, where this probably wouldn't have been the best day to fly around Juneau.
Okay.
Now, there was an area of moisture that pushed south from the southwest up along the coast that pushed in a stratus layer. And in the stratus layer, there was a lot of those supercooled liquid drops, or a lot of stickiness.
Okay.
And so the flight icing threat was able to, in the pinks and the reds there, was able to identify where that icing was. Now, this is really cool. It's really cool to be able to identify that. There is, of course, caveats to every product. Much as we wish it would happen, sun doesn't shine all the time, unless, I guess, if you live in northern Alaska during the summertime.
Right.
But we need that sun to be able to bounce off those clouds and to be able to see where those super cool drops are.
Okay, so it's a daytime only tool.
It is, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Right now, of course, we're in the era of advanced satellite technology, and there is a satellite that can actually use moonlight to see clouds.
Yes.
And so sometime in the future, we hope to be able to do that.
Okay.
Another thing that is a bit of a challenge is multiple layers of clouds. You can only see so far through a thick cloud.
Okay.
And if it's thick enough, sometimes you can't see a layer of icing that's below there.
Right.
But even besides those caveats, this product has a lot of potential to help out Alaskan aviators here.
Well, it sounds like a really big deal, and something that forecasters at the Alaska Aviation Weather Unit could use probably on a daily basis, and especially in the middle of a really big storm.
Yeah, I would think so.
Do you have a really good success story in the lower 48 using this tool?
It's a fairly new product, and so we're still evaluating it. But yeah, we've had a lot of cases where we have seen that it does tend to capture those icing conditions.
Okay, very good. Well, Amanda, thanks so much for sharing some of the very interesting satellite imagery and the tools that you're using there at the Aviation Weather Center in Kansas City with us here in Alaska. People can probably find some of this information online, right?
Yeah, here is a website here. It's a page from NASA Langley, and they have this imagery as well as a bunch of other satellite imagery that you can take a look at.
Okay, great. And I'm sure our friends at the Alaska Aviation Weather Center and the unit will be using that in the coming months there with your training and your help there to learn more about that tool to help Alaska aviators any day of the year. That's wonderful stuff. So thanks again for joining us, Amanda, and we welcome you to view any of our Alaska weather facts on YouTube anytime at the address below, and we'll see you next time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Marine forecast for the southeast coast, outer coastline on the south outer coastline. Gale warnings tomorrow for south to southeast winds 35 knots, seas 20 feet. And gale warnings for the north coast, southeast winds 35 to 40 knots. And for the northern inner channels, gale warnings there for north winds at 35 knots. And about the same for Stevens Passage and Clarence Strait, southeast winds 25 knots with 8-foot seas. Moving on to Saturday, Christmas Eve. Small craft advisories for the central and south coast. South to southeast winds, 30 knots, seas around 20 feet. Gale warnings for the north coast. Southeast winds 30 to 35 knots. And gale warnings continue out of the north for the northern inner channels at 35 knots and north 25 for Stevens Passage. Clarence Strait, southeast winds 25 knots. Prince William Sound. Gale warnings on Friday. Northeast winds sustained at 35 knots, seas at around 7 feet. And for the North Gulf Coast, northeast winds 35 knots with higher gusts. Barren Islands, northeast winds 35 knots with 20-foot seas. And Kamishak Bay, northeast winds of 45 knots. Gale warnings for Cook Inlet for winds out of the north and northeast at 35 to 40 knots with 8 to 10-foot seas. And Saturday, good gales still for southern Cook Inlet and Kamishak Bay, northeast at 40 knots in those locations. North Gulf Coast, gale warnings, east-northeast winds, 35 knots. Prince William Sound, down under the gale threshold there to small craft advisories for northeast winds at 30 knots. Barren Islands, east at 30. And for Kodiak Island on Friday, gale warnings. Northeast winds 35 to 40 knots. The Alaska Peninsula, east-northeast winds 30 to 35 knots. And Bristol Bay, northeast winds 30 knots with 7-foot seas. And then for Saturday, gale force northeast winds of 40 knots for Bristol Bay, and gales also for the Bering Sea side of the Alaska Peninsula out of the northeast at 35 knots. Pacific side lighter and southwesterly at 20 knots. Kodiak Island, northeast winds 30 to 40 knots with 10 to 14-foot seas. Eastern Aleutians for tomorrow, west to northwest winds at 15 to 20 knots. Only southwest at 15 for Adak and Atka, and then the western Aleutians, a little bit more of a brisk wind out that way. Kiska to Shimia, northeast at 30 knots with seas up to 20 feet. And for Saturday, western Aleutians, east-northeast winds 25 to 30 knots. Central areas, north 25 to 30 knots. Eastern Aleutians, north to northwest winds 25 to 30 knots. For the southwest coast on Friday, gale warnings, northeast winds 40 to 45 knots. St. Matthew Island, winds will be northeast to 45 knots. St. Lawrence Island, northeast winds 45 knots, and even a 40-knot northeast wind there for Norton Sound. And for the Pribilofs, gale warnings also, east winds 35 knots, 17-foot seas. Then on Saturday, those winds become northerly and increase to 40 knots for the Pribilofs, and north winds at 45 knots St. Matthew Island, 35-knot northeast winds for Norton Sound and St. Lawrence Island. For the southwest coast, gale warnings for Saturday, northeast winds at 45 knots. For the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, variable winds 10 to 15 knots Friday. Central coast, variable to southwest at 15, then east at 15 for the western Arctic coast. And for the south Chukchi Sea, Wells to Cape Thompson, north winds 25 knots. That continues through Saturday with 25-knot winds there. Otherwise, the western Arctic coast, northeast 15 to 25. And the central coast, call it southeast at 15 knots. And for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, winds will be east at 15 to 20 knots. For tonight, increasing winds over the central interior area, especially the Copper River Basin locations, Matanuska Valley, where a blizzard warning kicks into effect at 8 p.m. this evening for blowing snow, reducing visibilities to a quarter mile in some locations. Snow on the increase across the Panhandle, rain and snow continue Kodiak Island, and periods of rain and snow across the southern Bering Sea to the Aleutians. That continues through Friday out that way, and pretty windy over southern Alaska tomorrow with areas of blowing snow, lighter winds to the north, chance of snow along the eastern Arctic coast, and winter storm warnings for heavy snow out for the Panhandle, and some of that working into the southeast interior. And that pushes northwestward a little bit with some light snow across south central Alaska, warmer over the southern Panhandle with snow changing to rain, and colder out over the eastern Aleutians.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.